What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatoito Boxing Show. And man, what a weekend it was! And it was an absolute pleasure of mine to have done the preview episodes. We ended up recording them back to back on early Saturday, the early portion of Saturday, as we were waiting for the fights to get underway, especially the ones UK side, which was Chris Billum-Smith and a Rhea Park rematch. And I had a good buddy of mine who joined me. And what a blast. It was an absolute pleasure and a fun time to be able to cover all these fights, to just get into a dialogue, a narrative back and forth, and see how we were each analyzing each of these major fights that were taking place on Saturday. Of course, the main event, the one that we're going to cover here, and then the successive episodes we'll cover the other ones. But let's talk about the main card that was the talk of the boxing world, which was headlined by none other than Tank Davis, as he stepped into the ring against a highly touted contender by the name of Frank Martin, who was trained, or is, well, I guess was trained by Derek James. Reports are that he has now left. He's promoted by Errol Spence. He's the only fighter that Errol Spence has under his promotional banner. And Errol Spence, earlier this year, it was reported that he left Derek James and is moving on to a different camp. Now it looks like Frank Martin, after this loss, he's leaving Derek James himself and following the footsteps of his promoter and friend, Errol Spence. So, what a freaking card, man. It was a fun card for those that are knocking on PBC and what they're doing with Amazon and that they're hurting for numbers and this and that. I don't know. I don't know the specifics, the details as far as it gets into numbers, but I am a boxing fan, and I love to analyze fights. I love to watch the fights and the fighters as they develop, as they rise through the ranks, or those that find themselves at crossroads in their respective careers. This is a fight that was a very, very intriguing fight. It's hard to pick against Tank as it is, right? It's hard to pick against Tank because he hasn't given you much reason to want to pick against him, with the exception of the level of opposition. He has a very similar trajectory to that of what Floyd Mayweather had in his heyday, where people used to criticize that he was getting people either past their prime or on their way up, but he was not fighting people that were in their prime. You could make of it what you will, but remember that Mayweather was at the helm of Tank's career for a large portion of it, then followed by Leonard Ellerbe, who was obviously finding him these fights. And so the fights that you'll find that people criticize will be like the Mario Barrios, who was the lesser known of the champions at 140. When he fought Leo Santa Cruz trying to make a name for himself at 130, takes on this big hitting star in Tank Davis. And of course, we know how that turned out. And on, right? And then he fights Rolly Romero, but his fights sell. Tank puts butts in seats. He sells tickets. And so that's the attractive part about him, that regardless of who's stepping into the ring in there, people will ask for one opponent or the other. Face Haney, face Teofimo, he ends up fighting Pitbull Cruz. Face Ryan Garcia, he obliged. Face so-and-so, face Shakur, Lomachenko, and then he ends up fighting Frank Martin. So the critiques are always going to be there, and don't pay too much attention to the critiques, but rather pay attention to the body of work that's in front of you and how these fighters are developing, if they're starting to lose a little bit in their arsenal or if they're looking better each time out. What a fight it was. Frank Martin in my card was actually leading the scorecards. I had him up the first 3 rounds, just in succession, with Tank not winning a single one of those rounds, down by 3. The 4th round I actually gave to Tank, and then every round after that. The 4th round, Frank Martin, in my opinion, was actually leading that round. I believe the people that were scoring it on the broadcasting team gave the 4th round to Frank Martin, but I saw Tank starting his attack. He started landing some big leather, started landing some power punches, and they were the most effective punches, in my opinion, in the 4th round. Therefore, I awarded him the 4th round, and every round after that, he started stepping on it. It's very intimidating to see Tank come at you. He fights every bit of his height. He doesn't crouch down, whereas Frank Martin fights low. He tucked down. He fights very guarded, and he fights down low. He was fighting down to the height, even though he had a slight height advantage over Tank, yet he gave up that advantage and fought low. He was moving very good with the jab. He was circling around the ring very good. Decent footwork on behalf of Frank Martin. And he was actually pot-shotting Tank through the early rounds and avoiding some of the biggest hits. Very good defense, very reactive during that early portion of the rounds. Tank started setting traps in order to land his left hand and started finding success in the middle of that fourth round and to close that fourth round. Very little action on behalf of Tank, but he was very calculated, very measured in the way that he attacked Frank Martin. And then when he started unleashing, it was in spurts. And that's how Tank started gaining the rhythm, the advantage of the fight, and turning momentum in his favor. By the time that this fight got to the 8th round, in the 7th round, he hurts Frank Martin, and he shakes him up really good with a combination where he ends up crossing Frank Martin's jaw, just landing an uppercut, a right, and followed by a left, which ended up staggering Martin a little bit, and having him stagger in his footwork. But recovered fairly quickly, got himself back into motion, and then the round ended. But by the 8th round, those traps were working perfectly for Tank, and it was just a matter of time. And it was just so intriguing to see how Tank continued to devour ground slowly. And he started to infiltrate the space, the personal space, and the reactionary gap of Frank Martin, to where he didn't know what to respond to because he was getting hit from different angles. Very, very smart on behalf of Tank. The ring IQ was the story of the night for me, where Tank's IQ is at an all-time high right now. He is fighting with all cylinders, firing on all cylinders, whereas Frank Martin was hesitant once he started getting hit from different angles and started getting shaken up with power coming from angles that he was not seeing, especially those overhand lefts that he continued to land. Tank did. Frank Martin was getting caught with them. By the 8th round, Frank Martin knew that where he was losing, and it was so evident, and for Derek James, I don't recall if he actually told him to keep the fight in the center, but it was so evident that every time that Frank Martin found his back against the ropes, he was losing. And he was losing ground in quick succession, where Tank was starting to dominate, from gaining momentum to dominating momentum and gaining the advantage to his side. Frank Martin finds himself in the 8th round against the ropes. Tank starts landing punch after punch, combination after combination, just shaking Frank Martin. Frank survives the first onslaught, stands up somewhat, regains his height, remains on defense. Tank moves back in, lands right hands followed by 2 overhand lefts coming from the top, which Frank Martin partially blocked, but was completely bent and leaning forward, leaning to one side, to his left side, as Tank's left hands were raining down on the right side of Frank Martin's head and his traps and his ears. Those 2 successive left hands hurt Frank Martin so much that Tank set up that trap perfectly, that when he followed the 3rd right hand and Frank Martin blocked partially, he was expecting the same successive left overhand to rain down on him, and he prepared for it, except Tank ended up not hitting him with the left hand overhead, but rather sneaking in an uppercut and completely shook Frank Martin, knocking him out on his feet. He was dazed, looking sideways towards the crowd, and Tank delivers the knockout punch straight to the button, straight to the jaw, and just slept Frank Martin. It was such a beautiful trap that Tank set as far as rhythm, because he was hitting him to the point and it was so hard that he was hitting him that he made Frank Martin expect a certain attack, so much so that all Tank had to do was adapt to it, and he read it so quickly in a matter of seconds. He hit him, boom, raining left hand, followed by the right, boom, another left hand, raining down on the right side of Frank Martin, followed by his right, and then as Frank is expecting that left hand to continue landing, he opens, exposes his chin, exposes the center, and Tank snuck in that uppercut, which stood up Frank Martin in a dazed fashion, exposing his head, dropping his gloves, and Tank delivered a knockout punch right to the jawline of Frank Martin, drops him on his back, and leaves him out. Such a hard hit that Tank knew about it, that he just took off to the opposite corner and jumped on top of the corner and started celebrating. He knew that Frank Martin was not going to answer the count, and he was right. Frank Martin did not answer the referee's count. The fight ended by 8-round KO, and another victim of Tank Davis's, where he ends up being the first blemish on their respective record. If we look at the fighters that Tank has given a first loss to, Frank Martin being the most recent victim, his very last victim was that of Ryan Garcia, who was an undefeated fighter going in there. Tank Davis gives him the first loss of his career. Hector Luis Garcia, champ at 130, former champ at 130. He was the champ at 130 when he stepped into the ring with Tank Davis. 16-0, walked out 16-1. Now he's got the second loss, as he lost his title to who did Hector Luis Garcia? God, I can't forget his. How am I forgetting his name? Lamont Roach. Lamont Roach is going to be in action soon. Lamont Roach is going to be defending his 130-pound championship against Firgo McCrory on the 28th of this month. So he gives a loss to Frank Martin, Ryan Garcia, Hector Luis Garcia, Rolly Romero, who stepped in as a 14-0 record, gets the first loss of his record, knockout loss at the hands of Tank. Then he gets a unanimous decision against Pitbull, who already had a loss and a draw stepping into that fight. But prior to that was Mario Barrios, who was undefeated at that point and suffered the first loss of his career at the hands of Tank. A few years prior to that, 2017, 3 opponents in a row in that year for Tank Davis, where he gives Jose Pedraza the first loss of his career, Liam Walsh, and Francisco Fonseca in successive manner. Impressive resume that Tank Davis is starting to put together. And so leading into the fight, we were talking about it on the preview episode, that Bob Arum was not giving a chance to Frank Martin, and it was obviously a ploy, a promotional ploy, because he wants to have his main dog in Vasily Lomachenko face Tank Davis, since Tank expressed interest earlier in the year of facing Loma once and for all. So Bob Arum came out saying Frank Martin couldn't stand a chance. Well, now it's fair to say that he was right, and it looks like, as of the recording of this episode, Tank Davis and Lomachenko are in talks to have a fight potentially around November of this year. And that will be another huge, huge fight, not just for Tank, but another huge fight for Lomachenko, and one that he's been after for quite a while. A huge fight for the boxing fans and for the boxing world as well. So Tank Davis is just, it's hard to pick against him. It's very intimidating when he fights, so calculated, so measured. He takes every bit of power that you got to offer. Frank Martin hit him with some really, really heavy leather, marked him up on his right side. The right side top of the cheekbone of Tank Davis was really heavily marked, and he incurred some damage as well. But Tank just keeps walking through the punches, stays calm, stays cool, stays collected, stays patient, continues to walk his opponents down, walking towards his opponents. And it was so exhausting to see Frank Martin on the back foot, how much energy he consumed just continuously staying away from Tank Davis. Tank continues to walk forward, continues to walk through punches, continues to press, and his opposition continuously on the back foot, just draining their stamina, draining their energy levels. And I think that was the huge factor. Not just that, but then the power of Tank. That's what deteriorated Frank Martin so quickly. of Frank Martin that started finding success by pressing the action and pressing forward on Tank, and then resorted to becoming a counterpuncher and eventually ends up gassing out. To where, not to a point where he just couldn't move. It was just to a point where his attack started changing a bit, and then he started finding himself on the back foot and against the ropes, which is not how he started the fight. He went through several changes throughout the fight where Tank stayed the same. He attacked from the moment that he started executing his game plan of walking and pressing on the opponent. He didn't change. He didn't adjust his game plan. He just took the fight to him and kept walking and walking and walking and walking forward and pressing. And it was just overwhelming for Frank Martin, and eventually started wearing down. And add the punching power of Tank on top of that, and you get the result that we all witnessed. So Tank Davis remains perfect, improves to 30-0 with 28 knockouts. His only 2 decisions, one being Pitbull Cruz, and the other being Germán Ivan Meraz back in 2014. 30-0, 28 knockouts. Frank Martin has since commented that he's not going to hang his head on this, that he's going to come right back. And it'll be great to see him back in action hopefully soon so he could shake this off instead of letting it linger and potentially affect the rest of his career. Then the co-main event, David Benavidez, successful against the former WBC light heavyweight champ, Alexander Gvozdyk. A David Benavidez who gives up power. He doesn't have the same concussive type power, the same stopping power that he has at 168. But his power comes by way of the onslaught, of the action, of the multiple punches, the output that he is so good at delivering. He puts out 3, 4, 5 punches, and the accumulation is what takes a toll on Alexander Gvozdyk on Saturday night. He just hit him with everything that he could. Very good combinations, which often had Gvozdyk on the defensive rather than pressing forward. Gvozdyk found some success himself. Benavidez heavily marked on his face as well, but just would not quit. After the fight, Benavidez ends up mentioning that he had a damaged left hand, I believe it was. I may be wrong on the hand, but I know he mentions that he has a tear in his hand, that it was costing him. It was heavy for him to be able to land good punches, but he was punching through it and utilizing his hand, even though it was damaged. He utilized it, and there was no stopping him on Saturday night. He was going to press forward and do whatever he had to get the win, and that's what he did. For Alexander Gvozdyk, this is a bigger loss for him in his career than the win than what the win will do for Benavidez' career. For Benavidez, this is a venture into a new division where he says he doesn't want to be lingering around waiting for Canelo, a fight that he hasn't been able to secure yet at 168. So he's going to try to make his own path, continue forming his legacy. Solid win for him over a former light heavyweight WBC champ like Gvozdyk, a former Ukrainian Olympian, decorated boxer himself. Good win for Benavidez, but for Gvozdyk, losing to the smaller fighter coming into a division that he dominated at one point, this is a bigger loss for him. To where he lost to Beterbiev, where does he go from here? Now he loses to Benavidez, who's a new arrival into this division. Gvozdyk is going to basically start fading out, get himself into some more fights and try to climb himself or keep himself around the top 10 in title contendership. But for Benavidez, this was a solid win where now he opens a new path for him and is not just talking about not waiting for Canelo, but has now generated a path, created a path for himself at 175. He does lose power. is evident. We all know it. We all saw it. He does give up the power attribute as he continues to campaign in this division. But he still moves like a super middleweight. He's lighter on his feet than the opponents. He was lighter and quicker on his feet, especially with his lateral movement. He wasn't as flat-footed as we're accustomed to seeing him. He's moving in and out. He's doing very good lateral movement. Being able to stay so mobile in a light heavyweight division, and if he continues to campaign even higher than light heavyweight, it's going to pay off huge dividends for Benavidez, because most of the heavier boxers are a little more flat-footed, a little more stationary. So Benavidez, fighting like a smaller fighter, paid huge dividends for him, especially this past Saturday night against Gvozdyk. That, with the amount of output, the amount of punches that he puts out there, that's the key to victory for Benavidez. Swarming, overwhelming his opponents, and hurting his opponents, not with relying on one punch, but rather relying on a full arsenal. He gives up way on power, but not too much. He still possesses good pop, especially when he's delivering 3-4 punches, and accurate at that. So congrats to David Benavidez, who now becomes an interim champ at the light heavyweight division for the very same organization, the WBC. So now he's either going to knock on the door of Canelo, which he's going to continue knocking on that door and potentially go down to 168 in a huge mega fight there, or he's going to wait to see who wins between Bivol and Beterbiev, which it looks like that big undisputed fight is rescheduled for sometime in October of this year. So Benavidez could definitely get either another fight in between or just wait and see what's going to go on there. And meanwhile, add pressure to Canelo for maybe a September showdown. Not likely, but maybe. Because people are starting to hear, or at least there's news, that Canelo may be facing either Cuban fighter William Skoll, who not many people know about, or Edgar Berlanga, who not many people are fans of, and not many people want him not many people want to see him against Canelo, other than those that are cheering for him to get destroyed by Canelo. So good win for David Benavidez. From there, Gary Antoine Russell, who we were talking about in the preview episode, that when you see a fighter like Gary Antoine Russell with a 17-0 record, all 17 knockouts, all wins by way of knockout, stepping in against Alberto Puello, who once failed a drug test when he was in line to face Rolly Romero. And then I believe that's when Ismael Barroso entered. I may have my timelines mixed up, but Alberto Puello, who once failed the PED test, is back on his winning ways and hands Gary Antoine Russell the first loss of his career by way of decision. He gets a split decision over Russell, and it was a fight that didn't have too much action, but it had enough action to where the judges ended up giving a couple rounds an advantage to Alberto Puello. Spurts is what we saw in this fight on behalf of both of them. Spurts on behalf of Gary Antoine Russell, who has a lot of speed and tends to attack basically in succession, where he finds moments, he attacks, delivers several punches, huge combinations, not every punch landing, not the most accurate fighter, but a very quick fighter where he's able to smother the opponents with the amount of output that he delivers with. And Alberto Puello countering those punches, receiving the damage and then giving it right back, a little bit more accurate than Gary Antoine Russell, enough to where the judges gave him the split decision win, and Alberto Puello hands the first loss to Gary Antoine Russell of his career. Alberto Puello now putting himself in line for Devin Haney's WBC title at 140 pounds. So he remains undefeated. Gary Antoine Russell gets the first loss of his career. Alberto Puello calling for that fight against Devin Haney, and now has the interim version at that 140-pound division. Carlos Adames defends his title against Tero Geisha. A tough fight, which, again, not the most action, But very good moments on behalf of both of them. Very good moments for Terrell Geisha, who had some really successive moments where it looked like he was turning momentum in his favor and he was getting the best of Carlos Adames. Adames just stayed blue collar, just kept taking the fight to Terrell Geisha, eventually wearing him out and securing that unanimous decision win. Geisha gets the 4th defeat of his career, where Carlos Adames moves on to a 24th victory, and again maintaining the only blemish to his record, which came at the hands of Patrick Teixeira years ago. He defends his WBC world middleweight title, and hopefully we see him in a fight against Janibek, should Janibek be successful in his next outing, where he's putting both titles on the line himself. He's the only unified champ at 160 at the moment. Carlos Adames holding the WBC, Erislandy Lara holding the WBA. Mark Magsayo returns to his winning ways with the unanimous decision win over Eduardo Ramirez. And then another fight that we covered in the preview was Elijah Garcia, who fights from Whitman, Arizona, just on the outskirts of the Phoenix area, who ended up suffering a some type of viral infection, stomach viral infection, back in March when he was supposed to fight Kyron Davis then. The fight got rescheduled for this undercard. And Kyron Davis, who has experience with top names such as Durrell and losses to David Benavidez, 3 losses to be exact, 1 draw in his record. He gets the 19th win of his record and gives the first blemish, the first loss to Elijah Garcia. And Elijah Garcia, who I've been so excited for, and who just looked flat, who just wasn't himself. This is not the Elijah Garcia that I'm accustomed to seeing. He showed up flat, very flat-footed, very flat in his attack. Had a couple flashy moments there, especially down the final stretch. But maybe the 8th, 9th round, he started having some success against the ropes, against Kyron Davis. And then in the 10th round, he tried to just go all out and try to secure the victory, trying to go for the knockout, which is what he needed to do. He needed to stop Kyron Davis, who was just banking rounds from the very opening bell. Kyron Davis, very professional, very calculated, very patient, in control of the pace the entire fight, where we saw an Elijah Garcia who tried to make up time and try to step on the gas, but he just couldn't get it going. He was just off. He was off beat, off rhythm, and it just wasn't his night. There was no way he was going to pull this fight out. He was getting countered perfectly by Kyron Davis. He was getting beat to the punch perfectly by Kyron Davis. And that jab of Kyron ended up disrupting the flow and the rhythm of Elijah Garcia, which never really got to, for Elijah, he never really got to set his game plan in motion. And now he suffers the first defeat of his career. It comes by way of decision, by way of split decision. I want to see him bounce back because I've been so hyped about Elijah Garcia and his come up within the middleweight ranks that I've been pushing for an Ammo Williams Elijah Garcia showdown. I think that would be an absolute fireworks type fight. But with this fight, it really left you clamoring for more. I hope Elijah Garcia doesn't take too much of a long layoff, but is back soon, and hopefully sooner. Maybe he could even sneak himself up in the undercard of the August card, headlined by Terrence Crawford and Israel Madrimov. Hopefully he could sneak himself in that undercard and get active this coming August and just shake the cobwebs and get back into his winning ways, because I really feel like the upside for Elijah Garcia is huge. Is huge. He's got a lot of talent and he's got a lot of power the way he puts his punches together. But Kyron Davis just made it look too easy. Just picked him apart and just cruised to the victory. So with that, what a hell of a card it was. And of course, Tank Davis, we go back to the beginning to end this episode, to put a cap on this episode. It's hard to pick against Tank Davis. I wouldn't suggest you doing so. When the fight comes against Lomachenko, I mean, that's going to be a you pick 'em 50-50 type fight, but we got to take into consideration a Tank Davis that comes forward should that fight happen, a Tank Davis that comes forward, very calculated, who takes the damage and takes the punching and the prowess of his opposition and continues to walk him down, versus the expertise, the footwork, the mastery of Lomachenko. Again, the power is going to lie on heavy on the side of Tank, but the hands, the footwork is going to lie on the hands of Lomachenko, or on the side of Lomachenko. He is on the back end of his career. He just recently crowned himself champion when he defeated George Kambosos earlier this year. But he is on the back end of his career. We can't deny that. And Tank is firing on all cylinders at the moment, at the best moment in his career. So that's going to be a lot of the intrigue there. Old guard versus new guard, a fight that probably should have happened before, but if it would have been a sure shot win for Lomachenko. Now it's not that clear. And a lot of it is accredited to the way that Tank Davis is fighting, how patient he stays, how calculated he's fighting, how measured, and how accurate he is. He has such pinpoint accuracy when he delivers these punches that it is just impressive to see. I was in awe watching this fight, and I didn't want it to end. I wanted to see more of it, but you just knew that the end was coming. You started getting that feeling. The end is coming, and the end is near around round 5, round 6. You just didn't know how it was going to happen. But again, same thing, right? He does it to Mario Barrios. He does it to Leo Santa Cruz. He does it to Rolly Romero. Finds him against the ropes, continues to press the action forward, makes him uncomfortable, puts him in awkward positions, and lands those uppercuts. And that's usually the beginning of the end for his opponents once he starts landing that power. The way that he sets traps is so beautiful that it's a sight to see. I hope I get to witness Tank Davis live before his career comes to an end. He's at a great point in his career where this is probably the perfect moment to go witness him live and see him perform live. But yeah, what an amazing card. And I don't know, again, I don't know what the pay-per-view numbers are like. I don't know what the viewership was like. I don't know what the attendance was like, and money and the gate revenue. I don't know. But it looked like a packed scene. It looked like a packed house, and people are fully engaged when Tank's fighting. People are on the edge of their seats or standing for the majority of the fight when Tank fights. And that's the case when you're watching it from home as well. You're just witnessing something different, and you can't really pinpoint what it is, but you're just in awe of what you're witnessing, and you just know that power is so game-changing that he's able to switch momentum to his favor on any given moment and in any given round. And that's exactly what we just witnessed again as he hands the first defeat of Frank Martin's career to him. So I'll leave you guys with that. Great card, and check out the upcoming episodes where we're going to talk about the downfall of Suriel Matias and Chris Billum-Smith retaining his title. We'll get into those and cover those cards as well, and get into more detail as to how these fights affected their respective landscapes within their divisions. So I leave you guys with that. Tank Davis retains his title, the big dog at 135, the big draw at 135 also, WBA champ. Denis Berinchik, newly crowned WBO champ. Lomachenko, newly crowned IBF champ this year. And then Shakur Stevenson, who's going to be in action in about a week's time or a couple weeks' time against Haritunian, who's a former opponent of Frank Martin. And he's got the WBC title. I'm glad that he didn't stay retired. Everybody kind of knew it was fake, but I'm glad that he's not retired. He's so young and he's got the upside to him. I want to see how he bounces back from that dull fight that he had against Edwin de los Santos late last year. I'm curious to see how he bounces back and how he looks so he could get himself into a big showdown. The easiest fight of all of these to make would definitely be Shakur versus Lomachenko because of Bob Arum. Denis Berinchik is also there now. He was part of a top rank card as he defeated Emmanuel Navarrete to get his hands around the WBO title. If Loma and Tank, which is definitely the biggest fight to make, does happen at the end of this year or in November as it's being reported, then with Shakur being successful against Haritunian, don't be surprised if we see Shakur against Berinchik. And that would be huge. It might even happen on the same card with Loma and Tank, and then Bob Arum puts a massive event in November. So, which would make sense time-wise for all of these fighters. So I'll leave you guys with that. Thank you guys again for tuning in, for all the love, the continued downloads, the messages. I'm starting to get some of your emails come in, and I love it. I love reading from you guys. Thank you guys again. Take care of yourselves, and let's keep pushing forward. Have a good night.